What is going on, my fellow nerds? Operator Otter here, and today we're going to discuss Rarity and the entire thing that's going on with this, because what's going on in the community right now is that the top percent players, the absolute elitists, are getting 4 to 6 div orbs every single breach that they run, and they are attributing it to Rarity and the fact that it has such a massive effect on their drop rates, when there has been a rather controversial piece of information that has been dropped a few hours ago where someone actually tested Rarity in these T15 maps, and they got some results that are rather abrasive to what the entire community has been thinking about Rarity. Now, there are some problems with this data set, and we will be going into this. If this is your first time watching one of my YouTube videos, because I was a Diablo 4 content creator, this is my first Path of Exile 2 video. One of the things that we love to do is to go in and break a lot of math and go into the Excel chart. So if this is something that you're in tune to and you like seeing stuff like that, this is what I'm going to provide for you to kind of show what the actual reason, or not the actual reason, but more so I should say the more relevant reason why elitist players are actually getting just so many more drops per breach than the average player. So the first thing that I would like to do is provide an audience with a thesis statement on the argument that I am trying to make within this video. And the reason being is that I believe that the audience within Path of Exile 2 does have a much higher expectation in terms of the quality for the videos that are being presented to them, and I want to be able to provide that for you. So the first thesis statement is the ability to clear is much more influential to the rate of drops than Rarity. And the second thesis is investing in clear speed is much more beneficial than Rarity for 90% of players. And many of the points and the arguments that I'm going to be making throughout this video are going to tie directly to these two thesis statements. So now let's discuss this Reddit post that has actually been causing some waves within the Path of Exile community. This is by Mirror21 on the Path of Exile 2 subreddit. And what they did was they tested 80 T15 white maps with 4 different sets of gear, being 0, 100, 200, and 300 increased rarity, with 20 for each set. Now, the first problem here is that they only tested it with 20 rather than 30. And the reason that's important is that in the world statistics, there's something known as the central limit theorem, where in order to grab a 95% confidence interval within your standard deviations, you actually need to test something 30 times. It's not a big deal. We can still draw some rather strong theses from what the data that this gentleman got, but regardless, that's just something that needs to be said. The second thing that I think is the kind of the bigger one here is they did not test how Rarity with maps is also influencing Rarity on gear. They just tested Rarity on gear, and I have been told, I don't know for sure because I never played the original Path of Exile, but I was told that in Path of Exile 1, Rarity on your gear and Rarity on the waystones actually multiplied across each other to create a compounding effect. Well, because they're not increasing the actual waystone drop chance, this could push or pull exactly what Rarity is doing, but it is showing what's happening with Rarity in the gear. And regardless, the findings that we're finding, even if that compound effect was in effect, I don't think it would actually do much. So let's talk about the results. So if we see here are all the currencies and the rares and the uniques and everything that they found. And really the only substantial change in anything was going from 26 to 126 for the exalted orbs. That was kind of it. Everything else is a very small, minuscule change, or not even a change, or that the actual chance for it to drop is so low that the increased rarity actually doesn't make sense over 20 maps, which is why we need 30. But regardless, we would see some type of substantial change if Rarity was really actually doing as much as we think it is at 300% Rarity. We would definitely see some type of substantial change, but we're not. We're not seeing anything that's substantially changing other than the exalted orbs. They're going from 12 to 24, and that actually explains a lot of what's going on within the inflation of the exalted orbs in the currency market. Because if you are doubling the amount of exalted orbs that are being put into the market, but the amount of divine orbs, or the rate that you're getting, is the same, then what's going to happen is that the divine orbs are going to stay where they're at, and just the cost of the conversion is going to double, right? If divine orbs are being found at a same rate as the exalted orbs are being found when they're increased by rarity, then the conversion rate would stay the same. But that's not what's happening. And this is kind of proven because before this whole rarity thing went down, the conversion rate for exalted orbs and divine orbs was about 65 to 70. And now, after all this rarity talk, you go look on the market. I believe that I looked like 10 minutes ago. It's like 130, right? For exalteds into divine orbs. And that kind of makes sense with the fact that, hey, now that everybody is putting a little bit of rarity on their stuff, they're actually finding twice as many exalted orbs, but everything else they're finding at the same rate. And that's why everything is much more in terms of the conversion rate for exalted orbs for any type of good. And that explains why. What this doesn't explain is, okay, then why are the top elitist players able to pull 4 to 6 div orbs per breach that they do. Because if Rarity isn't having nearly the effect that we thought, it does have an effect, but not nearly the effect that we thought, then what really is the reason why the elitist players are able to pull so much currency per breach clear that they do? And I believe more so that this has to do with their clear speed. I think it has much more of an effect on that. So let's talk a little bit mathematically about what's going on with breach and the clear speed and how the argument kind of supports what's going on with that. So when it comes to the breach, the first thing that I would like to discuss is kind of how the breach is actually functioning under a mechanical point of view. And this is what I've gotten from observation. I don't have any like proof stead stone that this is how a breach works. So if there's anybody out there who actually does know exactly how it works, please let me know in the comments below. But this is essentially how I think it's working. It feels like what the game is doing is taking the total amount of monsters that you have killed during the duration of the breach and dividing it by the area of the breach. And when that coefficient falls below a specific point, that is when the breach closes. So if we look at this, let's say that every 10 seconds, I'm able to kill 20 monsters. And at 10 seconds, the radius of the breach is now 5.5. That means the area of the breach is 100 and the monsters killed is 20. That means the coefficient is 0.2. All right, now let's go 10 seconds later. The radius has now doubled to 11, but that means that the area has almost quadrupled, but I've still only killed 20 monsters. That means the coefficient has dropped. And you can see that as the area increases, but I'm keeping the same rate of killing monsters, this coefficient is going to continuously keep dropping until eventually it gets to a point where the breach is going to close no matter what. So essentially what's happening is that with these elite players, what we are seeing within the games is that 90% of the population is able to get to about a radius of 200, and 9% of the population can get to a radius of like 400, and then 1% of the population can get to a radius of like 600. And what I want to show you here is the actual area and how much bigger that area is in relation. And what we can see here is that if you are able to get the radius to equal 600, then you are 9 times bigger than the 90% of the population. That also means that you have 9 times as many monsters. If we're spawning monsters based on area, and the bigger the area is becoming, the more egregious this is becoming, then eventually what happens is like, yeah, we're actually going to be able to kill 9 times as many monsters, but that's not necessarily what's going on. So let's look at how people are playing Breach versus the elitist, and that will also tie into some of the questions that we have. So now what we're going to do is we're going to veer into this Picasso level of art that I have drawn in PowerPoint. And the first thing I want to talk about is this little key. The purple is the breach area and the blue is the slain enemies. These are telling us the diameters of the breach. So half of that is going to be 200, which is the radius that falls in the suit right here. And then half of 1200 is going to be 600 that falls in suit right here. And what I want to talk about is the strategy that most players are using to clear a breach. And the way that they are doing it right now is that they open the breach and essentially they're following the outside of the breach as it's expanding, which creates this kind of spiral pattern based upon what the map is and whatever most efficient way they can, even if it's an open map, because some of the builds just can't support literally going everywhere fast enough. So you're kind of just moving in this spiral pattern because your clear speed just isn't big enough to clear the whole screen fast enough for you to then be mobile to move to the next spot. So you're kind of just moving in a nice spiral pattern. But as you do that, you can see that you really only cleared like 30% of the total density that's going on here. Whereas if you take the top 1% of players with their Silk Rope Autobomb builds or the Monk, Herald of Ice Shatter, or the mercenary builds or stuff like that, they don't run into that problem. They are literally clearing 95% of the total breach density because they just AoE cleared the entire screen and they have mobility that is 4 times faster than you or I. And because of that, and that means that they are killing more monsters divided by a bigger area, which means the coefficient stays bigger, which means that the breach stays open longer. And that is why they're able to get the breach to equal, 1,200 feet across or 600 feet as a radius, which means that the total amount of monsters that are spawning as compared to 90% of the players is 9 times more, but they are also clearing 95%. So they are clearing 3 times as many monsters at the rate that you or I are, and at the same time, they are also able to open up the breach to spawn 9 times as many mobs. So how many more mobs are they clearing as compared to you or I? Well, in order to solve this, we're just going to create a rather simple relationship equation. So essentially what happens is that if 500 mobs equals 30% of the total density, then how many would you be able to clear if you were clearing out 95% of the density? So basically, we both ran the same breach that only opened up to 200 feet or 200 feet radius. That was the area, this one, right? So if I killed 500 and that was only 30%, what would 95% of that be? Essentially, this is the way that we solve it. We multiply 500 by 95, 30 by x. We get 30x equals this number. We divide this number by x, and essentially if you were clearing out 95% of the density, it would have been 1,583 monsters. All right, moving on to the next step. So then if At 200 radius, 95% clear equals 1,583 monsters. And at 600 radius, it's 9 times more area, or 9 times as many mobs that are spawning. Then 1,583 times 9 equals 14,247. So what does that actually mean all the way through this? And what happens here is that 90% of the populations are killing 500 monsters in their breach, and 1% of the population is killing 14,000 in their breach. Now, these are not actual numbers. I'm just trying to get a concept across, right? I'm just explaining kind of like math, and these are just arbitrary numbers that I'm choosing. It's not actually 14,000, so bear with me, right? But what this means is that the 1% of players are killing 28 times as many monsters as 90% of the population. So if you're killing 28 times more monsters, that means you're going to get 28 times more loot. Ergo, clear speed is definitely the most important thing. So if you had to choose between getting rarity on your gear, which has a very small effect from the findings that we saw, or doubling how fast you're clearing, which will literally double how many drops that you're getting, clear speed is absolutely going to be the most important factor. And that's kind of the argument that we're trying to create here. So just pushing a little bit further, this is kind of like my personal rank for like what actually manipulates drops within the game of Path of Exile 2. And this is observational experience. This isn't objective. I'm sure there's going to be some arguments for pushing or pulling in one way or another, but this is basically where I'm at, right? Clear speed is definitely the most important factor. Your ability to actually move and kill things in an AoE setting is definitely going to be the #1 factor that is going to manipulate how many drops that you get per hour. After that, it's going to be hardware, because if you're moving faster and you're killing stuff faster, it's going to be more demanding on your PC or your hardware. And so having better hardware is going to allow you to have a smoother gameplay experience, and therefore you can play more efficiently. After that, it's going to be the actual map, right? Things like Creek, Willow, Savannah, Blooming Fields, what else? Rust Bowl, things like that. Great maps, super awesome maps. Much better than playing things like Forge, Augury, Mire, stuff like that. So, you know, your map selection has a very big influence on how many drops you're going to get with a breach. After that, you're going to have your Atlas, which is going to actually manipulate your waystones and your tablets. And then you have your tablets, which are going to be manipulated by your Atlas. And then lastly, I think it's Rarity. I think Rarity has a very small effect on this. To really drive this argument home as to like what I'm trying to get across for the thesis of this argument, the thing is that, like, look, if you gain 20 times the amount of gear, or 20 times the amount of ways to get gear, if you're able to, when you get a drop, I get 1 Exalted Orb, but when you get a drop, you get 20 Exalted Orbs, but you can never kill that target. You're never going to get those drops, right? You actually need to like kill the mobs in order for the drops to appear. So being able to kill mobs is a very important thing. Next, it's much cheaper to double your clear speed than it is to double your magic find. So let me show you something here, right? So if we look at these boots, these are 35% movement speed boots, which are really good with the 25% rarity and some mana energy shield. This is basically what we want on a Spark Mage with a stun threshold, and they are going for 10 div orbs. If I went for 5% less movement speed and I got all of this resistances with more mana and more stun thresholds, you can see it only costs 1 div orb. You can fully fund a character that can blast T15s no problem with 10 div orbs. You really can. It's really not that bad. But as soon as you start looking for gear that has rarity on it, you can take that price and jump it by 5 to 10 times more expensive, because people are putting so much value on rarity, when I don't believe it actually really has a big effect on how many drops you're getting. It really just is a case of how fast you can clear things. That really just seems to be the more powerful thing that's happening within Path of Exile. And lastly, it's arguably almost impossible to double your magic find, but it is possible to double your clear speed. With rarity, we can see that like you could probably get to like 1800% rarity, and that might double things, but like nobody can get to 1800% rarity. I think the max is like 900% right now in terms of like your gear with the waystone. And even at that, we're not really seeing double drop rates, right? We're seeing more on the Exalteds. The Exalteds are getting double drop rates, but nothing else is really getting doubled. And how much does it cost to get to that point, right? But how much does it cost to just double your clear speed? Man, you, for the same cost of getting up to 900% rarity, you can increase your ability to clear those maps 10 to 20 times faster. So that's where I would go, right? Like being able to kill stuff and kill more stuff is definitely going to have a larger effect on how many things drop than affecting rarity. And that's really the thesis point of this argument. So that's all I have for you, ladies and gents. I hope you enjoyed this video. You know, more to come in the future. I wish you a happy New Year's. I shall see you in 2025. Other than that, I got nothing. Operator Otter,